men don't care about IQ.
I really strongly disagree with that because, look, you don't want a low intelligence woman as a life partner, sharing a house with, who's incapable of understanding finances, who doesn't succeed in her career, who's not a smart, devoted mom to your kids, who's socially embarrassing.
Do you think humor is more of a factor, I guess, in mate selection than height?
Look, try rationally to focus on, out of the traits I think I want, which of them actually matter in the modern world.
Geoffrey Miller, welcome to my podcast.
Great to be here. Really excited.
Yeah, this should be a very interesting conversation. I have a bunch of questions, mostly about men and women. But before we get started, can you give a brief background about who you are and what it is you do?
I'm an evolutionary psychology professor, so I study human nature, and I work at University of New Mexico. I did a BA at Columbia, my PhD at Stanford. I worked in England for 10 years and lots of other places. And I've mostly studied human sexuality and mate choice and how we fall in love and what traits we fall in love with. And then more recently, I've gotten a lot more engaged in kind of political Twitter and a movement called effective altruism. And I'm currently working on how to make artificial intelligence behave better with humans.
Wow. Okay, that's cool. Well, that's okay. I'm going to add a couple questions in there then. AI, and then you said effective altruism?
Yeah. The EA movement. We can talk about that too if you want.
Yeah, no, I definitely do. Effective altruism. Okay, cool. Wow. Well, I just have a whole bunch of questions to throw at you about sexuality, I think, and the dynamics between men and women. So first off, this is something I've been wondering for a while. Do females compete with each other? Because we know men compete with each other to get women. Do females compete with each other?
Oh yeah, very much so. I mean, the methods of what we call female versus female competition, very technical term. One thing I love about evolutionary biology is actually the technical terms are pretty intuitive and pretty easy to understand. Like my colleague Tanya Reynolds here at University of New Mexico specializes in studying female-female competition. Now, the typical forms that takes tend to be more verbal and reputational rather than direct violent conflict, okay? So women might derogate each other behind each other's backs. They might try to manipulate each other's self-esteem if they feel like their sexual rivals competing for the same guys or for the same social status. So it's not like, you know, women getting into prehistoric MMA fights that much. It's more about using the weapons of verbal creativity and theory of mind and social sensitivity to just get subtle but sustained advantages over your female rivals.
So high school, basically.
Yeah, high school, but forever and in prehistory.
Oh, that's terrible. That's terrible. It does seem to get, at least I know that my relationship with other women has gotten a lot better since high school. So is that because the competition tones down, or is that because we're all stuck together in a classroom? Or do people get smarter and sneakier? What happens there?
I think, yeah, good insights. I think it's a combination of all of that. Smarter and sneakier, so you're using less obvious competitive tactics. So, for example, one thing that can happen is women can be in a friendship circle, and you want to sort of derogate or ostracize or marginalize one particular woman in the group, so she has lower status. Instead of women saying, okay, Jane over there, she's a bad person, we should avoid her, you could say something like, you know, I'm really worried about Jane because it just seems like she has really bad taste in men, and she's, you know, I'm worried about her drinking, you know, whatever. And so there'll be the implanting of negative information about some rival within her friend group or her colleagues or coworkers. And then the other women will think, oh, well, this person derogating her is expressing what sounds like genuine empathic interest. Like they're concerned about Jane's drinking and her being too slutty and stealing other men or whatever, right? But the information itself is enough to lead other women to kind of marginalize that target.
If you guys haven't heard, I have launched a nootropics company called Smart Drugs, which was immediately banned by MailChimp because of the use of the word drugs. But anyway, we're going to be coming out with a bunch of new products, but our first one is After Party. It's not just for partying, though. People seem to hate the name because they're like, I don't party. I just drink 2 glasses of wine before I go to bed. You're partying. I know. Anyway, this is about to sell out because COVID and the government ruined the world, so it's going to take 4 months for me to restock. So if you want to try it now. I've been using this for literally 10 years to avoid hangovers, sourcing the main ingredient, dihydromyricetin, online since I was 20. Dad and some of his friends came to Miami in the last month to film at Peterson Academy, and some of his friends were drinking. He doesn't, but they do. And I brought in a bottle of After Party, and one of his friends was like, this is somebody I've known since I was a kid, was like, Mick, you showed me this 10 years ago, and I literally travel with it. Without you, I would be drinking much less bourbon, which is not the goal of this pill at all. It does work, though. It helps break down the toxic byproduct of alcohol, acetaldehyde. Acetaldehyde is what damages you so badly when drinking. Check it out and the study showing how it works at smartdrugs.life. There's a lot of nerd stuff on there. I worked hard on the website, broke down some scientific studies. Code MP for 15% off. Hopefully you like it. And if you don't, there's a 30-day money-back guarantee, no questions asked. So if you don't like it, no worries. I just want you to give it a shot because it works to make you not feel awful after drinking. Even if it's just a couple of glasses of wine, your body can use help breaking down acetaldehyde. So try it out, smartdrugs.life, code MP. I hope you enjoy it. Enjoy the rest of this episode. Have you done work on personality? Because I know that there are some women who are really good at that and that's what they do. And I feel like some people are less interested in that. Is that from personality differences?
Yeah, I'm a big
big
fan of the Big Five personality trait system, and I've often used it in my research. It's a great thing to measure. When in doubt, if you're running a psych study, try to get some measure of general cognitive ability or intelligence if you can, and try to measure the Big Five, because they're almost always predictive. In this particular case, female versus female competition, it'll probably be a combination of low agreeableness, which is kind of associated with, assertiveness and a little Machiavellianism and manipulativeness. There'll be a little bit of extroversion mixed in terms of being socially assertive enough to try to manipulate other people rather than just kind of withdrawn and introverted. And I think it also takes maybe a relatively high degree of emotional stability or low neuroticism to do these tactics, right? Because they're risky and they can backfire. So if a woman's very neurotic, worried, anxious, depressed, she's not as likely, I think, to use these kinds of tactics. But that's pretty speculative. It's pretty speculative, but that's where I'd put a bet.
Okay. I hope it's speculative. You've just described exactly my personality. Almost. Actually, not entirely. No. The agreeableness. Have you ever split it up into like subdomains?
Yeah, the facets.
So agreeableness splits into the facets. Sorry. I scored almost 0 in politeness, but compassion was like 89. Mm-hmm. So I guess that doesn't make me like unreasonably disagreeable on average.
Yeah, I think the facet level traits are really important because a lot of people have kind of vaguely heard of the Big Five, like from you or from Jordan Peterson or whoever, but each of them has these subcomponents, right? Just like intelligence has components like spatial intelligence, verbal intelligence, social intelligence. Any given Big Five trait, like agreeableness, will have these little components like compassion, politeness. I'm kind of like you, like online, on Twitter, I'm not super polite. In person, I'm highly polite. And I like to think I'm pretty compassionate in terms of like actually caring about people and animals and so forth.
Yeah, interesting. Okay, very cool. Well, I guess we might as well talk about what effective altruism is.
This is a movement launched about 10 or 12 years ago by a couple of Oxford moral philosophers, Will MacAskill and Toby Ord. And it's grown into this kind of global movement of tens of thousands of people, mostly young people, mostly highly compassionate, maybe a little bit Aspergery on average, like highly rational, highly systematizing people. And the concept is try to do the most good that you can in the world, but using reason and evidence and open-minded kind of rational debate rather than just virtue signaling or rather than just going with your gut feeling or your empathy, right? So what the effective altruists tend to talk about a lot is, look, if you're going to give to charity, try to find charities that actually have good empirical evidence that what they're spending money on actually does some good, actually works. So they like recommending charities that have actually run like randomized clinical trials for their interventions. So for example, one thing that really seems to help to reduce global poverty is a thing called direct cash transfers. So there's an organization called Give Directly where you can donate money to them and they'll simply like wire the money to poor people who could use it and who have the wisdom to spend it on whatever they think they need instead of us telling them what we think they need. And randomized controlled trials show that's actually very effective at reducing poverty and improving lives. So the basic idea is you try to have kind of a scientific mindset rather than just a virtue signaling mindset when you're doing beneficence, when you're trying to do good in the world. And I've taught several courses on the psychology of effective altruism and some of the ways that our kind of intuitive moral psychology fits with that viewpoint, but also really struggles with it. Because I think a lot of our moral intuitions basically come from hundreds of thousands of years of virtue signaling, right? To get credibility at an ethical level within our little clan or tribe. And we're not very well adapted to thinking about large-scale problems that like affect 8 billion people in the world or that affect maybe billions or trillions of animals. So EA is basically an attempt to like fill the gap between our evolved moral intuitions versus what actually works in the modern world. I hope that makes some sense.
That definitely makes sense.
It's a pretty weird movement, but I think it's exciting.
Well, it sounds like intelligent people trying to do good.
Yeah.
That sounds good.
Yeah.
That sounds good to me. So you said we've all evolved through virtue signaling and kind of smaller groups of people and tribes. Do you think that goes for kind of everybody back then across the board? Because I always assumed virtue signaling was, well, basically lying.
Yeah. I have more of a kind of neutral take. Like I published this little book called Virtue Signaling in 2019. And I tried to emphasize like virtue signaling as a term became very common around 2016 with the Trump versus Clinton election. And it was often used by conservatives to make fun of leftist people preaching at everybody, but not actually doing very much good, right? So there's a negative kind of cheap talk version of virtue signaling where you're just running around on social media saying, you guys should do this, don't do that, you're good, you're bad, blah, blah, blah. My view is virtue signaling can be extremely positive. For example, if you got two single people and they're searching for mates and they meet up and they have a date, they're trying to evaluate each other's kind of ethical compass and their personality traits, like how agreeable, how compassionate is this person? And they'll talk about all kinds of things that basically boil down to virtue signals. But some of those might actually be reliable indicators, right? So if they say, look, I volunteer in a soup kitchen 6 hours a week, it's hard to do that if you're a psychopath, right? Somebody with no empathy couldn't stand to do that week after week. So it is actually some kind of good signal of underlying values and personality traits. I just wish that more people were selective about what they actually do and maybe do things that deliver real benefits to others rather than just working as really good signals of who you are.
Well said.
Thanks.
Okay. Slightly changing topics then. What's the evolutionary benefit of psychopathy? Why is that still around?
There's a lot of discussion about this, and there are, I think, very good insights going all the way back to the 1980s, right? People have been discussing this. If humans evolved in small clans and tribes where you know everybody and you gather huge amounts of social information about people you interact with regularly, you might think there's just no room to be a psychopath. If you're regularly exploiting, deceiving, manipulating people, aren't people going to find out and push you out of the clan? And that's basically a death sentence, right? Exile equals death.
Yeah.
If you're in a prehistoric situation where you cannot survive by yourself out in the wilderness. Well, my personal hunch, actually, is that the rates of psychopathy in small hunter-gatherer societies are quite low. I think it's correct. You can't survive as a psychopath in a small clan where everybody knows you. However, once you get civilization and agriculture and city-states and big populations, and you can move from group to group sequentially, then suddenly there's a niche. There's a niche for the psychopath. So my hunch actually is psychopathy, or sociopathy more generally, might be a fairly recent development and just kind of post-civilization development. If you look at like the American West, like my ancestors were roaming around in the 1800s, and you could, if your reputation was shattered in one place, you could move to a new town, adopt a new identity, build up a new reputation, get people to trust you. And it can work. And, nowadays, psychopathy seems to positively predict like number of babies, especially for men.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense.
Because it's associated with sexually exploitative tactics, with seduction, manipulation, not just like physical sexual coercion, but also, I've been a little bit peripherally involved in the pickup artist movement for like 15 years, and I've talked to the PUAs, and I know some of them. And it's a weird movement because there are a significant number of like actual hardcore psychopaths in it who are trying to figure out, okay, how do I, seduce, manipulate, deceive women? And then there's a bunch of normies and normal people with normal personalities in it who legitimately just are confused by modern dating and want to learn good, honorable, methods for finding a girlfriend. But there's certainly a niche for the psychopaths in the modern dating market.
That's very interesting. Do you think social media too has like increased, I guess, how often you see psychopaths? Because I feel like if you're an extroverted person and you're disagreeable. Oh, actually, before we get into like that question, can you describe what personality traits compose a psychopath?
I mean, the usual ways of recognizing like a hardcore kind of criminal psychopath as opposed to like a white collar sociopath. Okay. Hardcore criminal psychopath would be lack of empathy, lack of remorse. They're very comfortable lying. If you catch them out in a lie, they're not embarrassed. They just keep lying some more to cover it up. They tend to have an unstable lifestyle. They move locations. They move jobs a lot. They have a kind of complicated, checkered sexual history with lots of ex-girlfriends. Don't want to talk about why the breakups happened. They tend to be impulsive, sensation-seeking, drink a lot, do a lot of drugs, drive fast, often have a criminal record. And so, if you're a woman and you're kind of on the lookout for, you really want to avoid legit bad guys, I highly recommend reading a couple books about psychopaths so you can know these these traits and kind of recognize them when you see them.
What about conscientiousness? Is that what plays a role in guilt?
Yeah, totally.
Do you think?
I think conscientiousness is associated with self-control and forward planning and willpower and resisting temptation. But also, I think in a social context, susceptibility to guilt and shame is part of conscientiousness, right? Like when I was planning this podcast, it's like, okay, I'm going to put it in my Google Calendar, make sure I'm there on time, feeling anticipatory like guilt and shame if I fail to show up, that's conscientiousness. And the psychopaths tend not to have a whole lot of that. Like they'll just flake out on things and not care and not feel bad about it.
Wow. I know that that's not good. It sounds kind of relaxing though. But I don't know how far you'd get in life without destroying all of your relationships and maybe being miserable, but
yeah, it's
kind of
an easy way to live until you end up in federal prison, and then it's not so great.
Yeah. Okay, what about white-collared sociopaths? What do they look like? Blue-collared?
Well,
you didn't correct me, but did I do that wrong?
Yeah, so
white-collar,
you can
blue-collar?
have white-collar sociopaths who don't typically get involved in violent fights, and they don't typically end up in jail, but they're willing to do the lying, deceiving, manipulating in order to get higher status, wealth, and prestige. So you might expect them to end up in professions like sales, marketing, politics, running crypto exchanges that don't actually have the crypto that they promise to have, etc. And then I know some forensic accountants who work on white-collar crime and figuring out what actually happened in this company, where did it go wrong? And they say there's also something called a pink-collar psychopath, which is they start out white-collar, right? They're not violent, but if they get audited, if there's a legit threat that could destroy their career, then they can actually turn violent and get some blood on the white collar, right? So that's the pink collar.
Oh.
So auditors, people who do taxes, white collar crime investigators, they do have to be a little cautious that just because somebody has an MBA doesn't mean they're never going to turn violent if you're probing deeply into the finances of their shady startup company.
Yeah. Yeah, fair enough. I bet you could get some people who weren't even really on the sociopathic spectrum, and still, if they do something wrong and then get probed into, can turn violent.
Yeah, totally. And there's certain kinds of professions and social situations that can kind of nudge people either in the compassionate direction or the kind of sociopathic direction, just because the norms in their profession. So think about if you go to med school to become a surgeon, right? You actually have to become a bit of a situational sociopath to do surgery at all, because most of us have an innate aversion to like cutting into people and messing with their organs. So Thank God that humans can suppress that kind of compassion under certain circumstances where it's adaptive to do that.
Why did lying develop? Is that an evolutionary tool? Like, why is it that, I mean, I guess we just talked about psychopathy a little bit and sociopathy, but why is it that some people lie so much, that tell stories constantly? Can that be due to, childhood issues, and can that develop because of that? Or why do some people tell stories constantly?
I think, if you take a step back and ask, why did language evolve in the first place? Like, why can we communicate complex thoughts and feelings to each other in a way that no other animal species can do with as much finesse? People like Richard Dawkins have argued complex animal communication, like human language, did not evolve to convey truth. It did not evolve to reach some group consensus about how the world is. It evolved to influence or manipulate other animals or people to do things in your interest. Okay? So the classic example of animal communication is a male trying to seduce a female animal, right? Displaying some big courtship plumage or like a bird song, a whale song, a gibbon call, whatever. And the point is not to convey reliable information about the state of the world, right? The point is to convey information about, I'm a cool guy, I have good genes, my brain works well, mate with me and you'll have good babies, okay? So that's the foundation of a lot of animal communication. Then when it comes to humans, you know, a lot of chit chat that we do is sort of subtle bragging, or it's entertaining other people so that they will kind of reward us with more status or prestige or mating opportunities or jobs or whatever. So if you take that animal communication view of human language, then lying, but also kind of humor and telling benign fictions like stories and myths and entertainment, right? That should come as no surprise. It's only if you have this model of language that says language should work, like two objective computers communicating with each other to do like a hard-to-hack bank transfer, right? That's the wrong model of language. So, like, I've got a 10-month-old baby daughter, and I see her just learning, you know, the beginnings of babbling, and she can say mama and dada and so forth. And she will use those tools to the best of her ability to kind of manipulate us to get stuff she wants, right? Attention, food, playing with a certain toy. And so as soon as communication capacities develop, we start to use them to influence other people. And I think, you know, that's fine. It's just, there's good ways to try to influence other people. And then there's super deceptive, manipulative ways to do it that don't actually yield like mutual benefits at all.
Congratulations.
Thanks. You've got our daughter
Yeah,
too, right?
that's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, she's 5.
Yeah. Congratulations.
Yeah. Thank you. Hey guys, this episode was sponsored by Rabbit Air. As someone who's allergic to everything, I've been using air purifiers for years. I love Rabbit Air. I have their Rabbit Air A3 air purifier with my lion logo on it. It looks good. I think it looks good. It removes odors too, not just allergens. If you have a pet, you should also get an air purifier. If you have allergies or asthma, they are massively beneficial for removing allergens and dust from your environment. If you had mold issues, not only do air purifiers effectively remove unwanted bits of things from the air that can provoke an immune response, but it also looks great. This is fun too. Rabbit Air has their new Artist series, so you can get cool designs on your air purifier. Vincent van Gogh's Starry Night, you can put that on your air purifier. That's fun. They offer a 5-year warranty, free shipping and returns, and a 90-day money-back guarantee on all their products. Check out Rabbit Air's new Artist series now. Visit rabbitair.com today. That's RABBITAIR.com. Enjoy this episode. Okay. I want to talk, so you said you worked with or knew people in the pickup artist group, like whatever that is. Are there tactics you could tell men that aren't sociopathic but can work to help them get women?
Yeah, so Tucker Max and I did a whole book on this called, the hardback was called Mate, the paperback was called What Women Want, and this came out 2015, 2016. We took a very different approach. We were kind of reacting against pickup artist culture a little bit. The strategy we took is to try to help young single men understand what women want, what traits and skills they're looking for, and then to try to convince young men, actually, there aren't really very good like cheat codes. The way to attract a good girlfriend is actually become a better man and build the traits that are legit attractive. And so the whole book was basically about, like, if you just allocate a little bit of time and energy, you can actually get dramatic improvements in many of these traits. Like, it's not actually that hard to get in better physical shape. Whatever your body type, whatever your height, like, you can build muscle, you can lose fat, you can get more energy. Here's how to do it, right? And we talked about everything from kettlebells to jujitsu and so forth. Or if you want to improve your mental health, be less depressed and anxious and introverted and scared. Like, there's reliably effective ways to do that also. And like your dad has talked about some of these. Get enough sleep, eat right so your blood sugar is not going up and down all the time. Do your exercise, meditate, be mindful, blah, blah, blah. And then there's a bunch of other traits that matter to women, sense of humor. You can work on that, you know? A lot of young men will devote like 10 times as much effort to studying for one particular class in college as they'll devote to building their active sense of humor, like taking an improv comedy class or whatever. So,
That works. Like,
yeah,
you can improve that. I figured some people are just, I don't know, that you'd had to develop it like below the age of 10 or something. I don't know what I was thinking, but that some people are naturally so funny and some people aren't, but there are ways to fix that or improve that.
I mean, look, I'm a pretty hardcore hereditarian about a lot of things, and I think, you know, evolution and genes are really, really important. But we have these big brains in order to be able to learn useful skills. And I think just a lot of young men are like misallocating their learning time to like getting really good at Call of Duty or Elder Ring or some video game. And they could like take the hundreds of hours
Yeah.
that they're doing that and allocate it to stuff that like women actually care about and improve it dramatically. It's just that like the existing educational system isn't really geared up to encourage young men or young women to do that kind of thing.
Yeah, that's for sure. So what kind of traits, I mean, you named a few, but what kind of traits are women attracted to?
We talk a lot about confidence, and that you know, unless you're a psychopath, confidence is actually pretty hard to fake. Like, if a young man is getting reliable cues that they are respected and valued by other people, by other men, by other women, by their mentors, by their classmates, confidence naturally comes from that. If you're not getting those cues that people value and support you, it's really hard to fake it till you make it. It's really hard to sort of fake that kind of confidence. So there again, our counsel to young men is like, find groups where you are valued and you do get along with people and you've got your little posse, your little friendship circle, and try to get your confidence from there to start. Also, as you build up more sexual experience and you date more and you just interact more with women and get more comfortable with women, that also builds kind of sexual and romantic confidence, which again is very hard to fake. A lot of young men have this experience, right, that no women pay attention to them for a long time until they get a girlfriend. They get a girlfriend. Suddenly they're getting sexual validation, romantic validation, and suddenly other women are paying attention to them. And they don't even know what changed. But in biology, that's called mate choice copying, when females are more attracted to a male that's valued by other females, right? And I think that's kind of mediated by sexual self-confidence. That if a man has a girlfriend already, he knows at least there's one woman out there who values me, and he kind of internalizes that validation and then like radiates it outwards somehow in body language or how he carries himself, and then other women pay attention to that.
Oh, that's interesting. So you think women would be more attracted to a man in a relationship even if they didn't know that they were in a
Yeah,
relationship?
yeah, I think so.
That's cool. I haven't heard that before. That's cool.
I don't know
Hmm.
if there's any good like empirical psychology research on that, but I'd be extremely surprised if that didn't happen. And like there's so many anecdotal reports from guys talking about this, that like there's long dry spells,
Yeah,
nobody
yeah.
wants me, and then when it rains it pours, get a girlfriend and suddenly everybody else wants me. Yeah.
Interesting. Okay. Well, I like that theory. Okay. Do you think humans are naturally monogamous? Do you think some are naturally polygamous?
The line I take on this is I do think humans evolved to form long-term pair bonds. I
Okay.
think that's pretty clear. I think, look, like 5 million years ago, our ancestors had huge sex differences in body size. The males were about twice as big and heavy and strong as the females, right?
Oh,
And
wow.
that is what you see when there's a highly polygamous system, meaning the top few males mate with most of the women, and then most of the males don't get any mates. So you get intense competition between the males to be big, strong, aggressive, dominant, right? And to sort of monopolize the
Yeah.
females. But then what happens is the males evolve to be a little taller and a little stronger, but the females start to catch up, right? The females
Yeah.
rapidly increase. And so now, although it seems like males are much bigger and stronger than females, we're actually about as evenly matched in body size as any primate, as any mammal gets. That's an indicator of pair
Wow.
bonding. That's an indicator that males and females were matching up, that they were forming long-term relationships that were at least socially monogamous, which means they hang out together, live together, sleep together, raise kids together, share a lot of food with each other, share care and compassion with each other, and so forth. So I think pair bonding is pretty central to human evolution, and it's what allowed things like the evolution of fatherhood. Right? If you look at most mammal species, the dads don't do anything. The dads just contribute genes. They don't help raise kids. They don't teach kids anything. They don't even protect kids that well. But with humans, males have evolved to do all of that. Now, that still leaves some room for like high status, high prestige males to sort of go outside the pair bond, right? And to attract additional women. And in most complex societies, the highest ranked, wealthiest males do have multiple wives or concubines or mistresses or whatever. So there's a kind of complicated system of like high status male polygamy on top of most people forming pair bonds, plus some women also being kind of getting resources from multiple males, like sex workers, prostitutes, etc. So are we naturally monogamous? It's complicated, but like I do think pair bonds are pretty central to human experience, and particularly I would bet that most babies that have been born over the last few million years have been raised by pair bonded parents.
Okay. That answers that question. Do you think, because you hear about this, or I've heard about this, that men, and probably from kind of the red pilled community, that men don't care about IQ.
Mm-hmm.
And I think even from my dad, I haven't heard men don't care about IQ, but I've heard that the reason IQ developed was because of female mate choice. What do you think?
I really strongly disagree with that view. When I wrote my first book, The Mating Mind, way back in 2000, I said, look, if it was the case that women care about male intelligence but men don't care about female intelligence, you'd get a huge sex difference in intelligence, right? Males would be a lot higher on IQ than females if females were
But
driving it.
wouldn't the genes, like, wouldn't, if you have a smart dad, then wouldn't the daughters inherit that anyway? So then,
Right, yeah, I do talk about that, but brains have costs, right? Big metabolic costs to grow a big brain and run it and think and talk and all that. So if the benefits of having the big brain were much more limited in women than they were in men, women wouldn't bother, just like women don't bother growing big upper body muscles for competition. But in fact, if you look at intelligence research, it seems like the sexes are extremely close in terms of general intelligence. Like either there's no sex difference or it's very, very minimal, and some sexes are better at some things than the other, but it's pretty even. So I think what's going on is when men are looking for short-term mate, like an opportunistic copulation, like a hookup, then of course they're not going to care.
opportunistic copulation. That's good.
Some biology.
I'm never using the word. Yeah, I'm never using the word hookup again. Opportunistic copulation. Okay. Anyway, continue.
Then, yeah, you don't care about the woman's intelligence, because if it's just about like the guy getting a notch on his belt, what does it matter how smart she is? However, there's good evidence that when men are getting more serious about choosing a long-term mate, like who do I want to live with? Who do I want to marry? Men get much more selective about intelligence than they are for hookups, right? Why? Because, look, you don't want a low intelligence woman as a life partner, sharing a house with, who's incapable of understanding finances, who doesn't succeed in her career, who's not a smart, devoted mom to your kids, who's socially embarrassing if you're like trying to be a power couple in your local environment. So, and we see this in the data on assortative mating, like when people pair up, they tend to match with someone with similar IQ. And that's typically a result of both the men and the women being pretty choosy about intelligence. So for women out there who go, yeah, but I've gone on a bunch of first dates, the men talk a lot, they don't take any interest in me, they don't seem to care whether I'm smart or dumb, they don't probe like, what do I know about the world? Yeah, but that's a first date. Let the relationship develop. What might often happen is after 3 months, 6 months, 2 years, if you're wondering, why hasn't he proposed to me? Why hasn't he taken this to the next level? Well, that's where the men are getting choosy. Right? That's where the men are now evaluating not just physical attractiveness, but the woman's intelligence and character. And the way that men get choosy, right, is they fail to escalate the commitment. Right? That's how they reject women.
Huh. Oh, so they'll just stay in it.
They'll just stay in it without moving in with you, without proposing, etc. Because look, if you're a guy and you've got a girlfriend and you're happy and you're having sex together, like, why would you suddenly just give that up for no reason? Right? If you're happy in the relationship, but she's just not quite smart enough or stable enough or promising enough to marry, then you'll just kind of drift along indefinitely, right? And that's often, sadly, what male mate choice looks like.
Huh. And women don't do that, right? If they'll break it off faster.
I think.
And is that because of like child rearing and bearing age?
Yeah, because women's time is much more limited in terms of fertility. So the men can kind of drift along. And if a guy's like, yeah, I had this girlfriend, we got together, I was 25, and we broke up when I was 32, no big deal, I'm still going to be fertile for another 30, 40 years. Yeah. But for the woman, right, he's burned through like 7 years of her precious fertility window. And so women ain't got time for that. They're going to probably break it off earlier if they think he's not the best pair bond mate.
And they should,
Yeah, absolutely.
probably. Yeah, 'cause huge risk to them. Okay. What body parts do you think are women attracted to? Like what we don't have to just say body parts, but like what traits are women attracted to?
The classic male body type, we talk about shoulder to waist ratio, a kind of V-shaped torso. Where there's broad shoulders, there's a relatively narrow waist. That indicates like you probably got some muscle and you're not too plump, and you're capable of doing stuff. You're capable of running and hunting and fighting and taking care of kids and doing all that stuff. So the kind of like Olympic swimmer physique, or the MMA fighter physique, There's different varieties of this, but basically having muscle, not having too much fat, and being physically capable of doing a wide variety of things, that's good. And then in terms of psychological traits, I've spent like 30 years studying this. Intelligence is important. All those big 5 personality traits are important. Sense of humor, which I've written quite a bit about, which is both an indicator of intelligence, right, particularly verbal intelligence, but also it's an indicator of social intelligence. Can you understand other people's minds enough to kind of tickle their brains with a funny story? And also, a good sense of humor is a good indicator of mental health, because people who have depression or schizophrenia or severe autism tend not to be very funny in terms of like, if they're trying to make a joke, it typically doesn't work, or they don't even bother making jokes. So if someone is reliably funny, particularly in one-on-one interactions, not just doing stand-up comedy, then they're probably relatively mentally healthy in terms of like not having the major mental disorders that are big red flags.
And do you think humor is more of a factor, I guess, in mate selection than height?
I think they're both important. I think, women seem to have this kind of heuristic or rule of thumb that I want a guy who's at least as tall as me and preferably at least a couple inches taller than me. So if you're a very short woman, that's pretty easy, right? Because there's about a 3 or 4 inch difference on average between the sexes. So if you're 5 foot tall as a woman, almost any man will do. I have some cousins, female cousins, who are like 6'1", 6'2". If they're looking for men who are even taller than them, suddenly only 1% of men will do, and that's a very restricted mating range. So,
Yeah.
and I've talked a lot about this with my 26-year-old daughter also, who's in the dating market in New York. And like one kind of rational strategy you can do if you're a woman is, particularly if you're tall, if you can kind of convince yourself to relax this height standard, this height obsession, it really broadens your mating pool, and then you can focus on all these other traits that you care about. But man, if you go on Tinder and you say, okay, I need somebody, at least 6 feet tall who's making at least 6-figure income, a lot of men won't fit that who might have made great boyfriends or husbands. And so if you're just using like this one criterion to eliminate 80% of men, I think that's pretty dumb.
That seems fair. I think that isn't that one of the most common search terms on dating apps too, is must be above 6 feet.
Yeah, yeah. And a
Yeah.
lot of women aren't even very well calibrated to like what is the actual average. I think in America the current male height average is about 5'10". But think about it objectively. Like in the modern world, is there actually any difference in terms of capability as a husband or father between a guy who's 5'9" versus 6'1"? I'm 6'0", so of course I'm a little higher than average, and I think height's good. Height's worked for me. But if I was giving advice to young women, I'd be like, look, try rationally to focus on, like, out of the traits I think I want, which of them actually matter in the modern world, versus which are just kind of these evolutionary vestiges that really aren't as relevant as you think, right? Because the guy who's like 5'8", who's in shape and confident and can fight and knows how to protect you and your kids, is actually more useful than some 6'2" lazy dude who's never learned any sports or can't do anything physical, and where you're just getting into like a height worship for no reason.
I think focusing on mental stability and humor, those are two pretty good traits. And IQ, but like you said, that kind of goes along mostly with humor.
Yeah.
But those are the three that I'd focus on: stability, humor, and IQ.
And
that can get you so far.
It can. And those are some of the key things you need if you're actually raising a kid with somebody, right? Sense of humor probably correlates pretty well with ability and willingness to play with a kid in a way that's kind of creative and where you enjoy the kid's company, and the stuff they do you find amusing and you can amuse them, and that's super important. And the stresses of parenting, you really need emotional stability and resilience, because
and a sense of humor.
if some guy who's single is already depressed and anxious, just wait till he's like sleep deprived with a kid, financially stressed, feels torn between family duties and career. Like, it doesn't get easier, right? So I think a lot of what women are looking for is they're sort of unconsciously anticipating what traits will be relevant once we settle down, we have kids, we have a household together. What's going to be important to me at that point?
What about for men? Do they like similar traits, or do things change?
Again, I think men get a lot more choosy about these mental traits in longer term relationships and for deciding who do I really want to settle down with. I think a lot of men, myself included, tend to be attracted to certain kinds of instability in women when we're young, right? Like borderline personality disorder can be extremely compelling and enticing and attractive to men. But that would make a terrible wife and mom. So
what does that look like in a woman?
Borderline is basically women who escalate romantic intimacy very, very quickly. They would fall in love very quickly. They can be extremely charismatic and verbally fluent and attractive to men. They can be sexually proceptive, so they'll actually chase men actively instead of just responding to them. But then once the relationship develops, they'll be often very prone to anger. They'll alternately idealize the boyfriend, but sometimes demonize him. So they can switch from like, you're the best thing ever, I love you more than I've ever loved anybody. 5 minutes later, they can be saying, you're the worst thing ever, I hate you, you've ruined my life, blah, blah, blah. So that's borderline-y behavior. And it is kind of irresistible to a lot of guys, but once you learn, oh no, that ends very badly, then that's not actually going to be a good wife and mother. So guys have to learn also to be wary of that, just like women have to learn to be wary of the bad boys who are kind of on the psychopathy dimension.
Okay, that makes sense. And then what were the other traits?
The men are looking for in women?
Yeah.
I think cheerfulness goes a long way. Baseline happiness level. Like my wife Diana is also an evolutionary psychologist. We've been together a number of years. She's just cool. She's hyperthymic. She's almost always happy, no matter what's happening. She enjoys life. She is very emotionally resilient. almost never gets depressed. And that's a very important quality when you're dealing with, life stressors like parenting and career and moving houses and so forth. So I think happiness and cheerfulness are, my sense is that like Gen Z doesn't really advertise those things because in a way you get more social credibility from
Yeah.
being neurotic and depressed than from being happy, and like being happy isn't cool. Um, but I think for attracting a long-term mate, it actually goes a long way. Because your spouse's happiness is going to determine a large portion of your own happiness over the span of years
Hmm.
and decades.
Hmm. Yeah. I think what's happening with Gen Z is there's so many people that are mentally ill. Like there's such a high percentage of the population is on some sort of psych med or suffering from depression or anxiety that, well, I don't know how it turned into a good thing really, but I can understand how it had to be less of a bad thing if so many people are
Yeah.
suffering. It's a weird situation right now.
And there's nothing wrong with having depression, anxiety, being on meds, etc. I just worry that if you have a dating situation that actually incentivizes that, right, that
Yeah.
actively rewards it, then you get potentially a lot of people who aren't really, they're not really temperamentally depressed, but they're kind of, they're doing whatever gets rewarded, right? And so if acting depressed or talking about
Mm.
mental illness gets positively rewarded, then you will see an increase in it. And I
Yeah,
think that can be quite dangerous.
that makes sense. Geoffrey, okay, two more questions. One, where can people go to find you? And two, if you could recommend one of your books that would help people, I guess, find a mate, which one would it be? Or understand themselves in order to find a mate, which one would it be?
Yeah, I've got a personal website, primalpoly.com, and on Twitter, I'm primalpoly. My Twitter persona, note, is not my real persona. It's kind of performative and it's very politically um, uppity and edgelordy. If you're a young single person, I do recommend the book Mate that I wrote with Tucker Max, which is basically pure dating advice for how to navigate the modern world. If you want to,
For men and women?
yeah, actually, a lot of the people who've read it are women, and they say, wow, it actually really helps me to understand the male point of view and the challenges that men are facing,
Cool.
so I can sort of navigate the mating market better. And if people want more of a deeper scientific understanding of where all this comes from, then the Mating Mind book from year 2000, I think, is good, and I'm still very proud of it, and I still think it's about at least 80% accurate scientifically.
That's pretty good. I'll link those below. Thank you very much for going on. That was interesting.
Thanks. Good to talk to you. Take care.
Take care.